Welcome back to Fandom Frontline. Tonight I'm going to be diving deep into the third season of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. Easily one of the most emotionally rich, visually stunning, and thematically mature entries this franchise has given us in a while. If you've been watching this franchise for this long, you already know what I mean. It's not just another zombie story. This season in particular was something closer to a fable about endurance, loss, and redemption. And now that this latest season finale has aired, it's time to step back and look at how it all fits together, how Daryl and Carol's story has evolved, and what the season means for the Walking Dead universe as a whole. I'll also talk about what it sets up for Daryl Dixon's final season next year, what it says about Daryl and Carol as characters, and how it continues the larger thematic thread that has run through this universe for 15 years. So if you're joining live, jump into the chat and tell me your favorite episode, moment, or performance from the season. And if you're watching the replay later, hit the comments and let's keep the discussion going. And with that, let's get into it. So let's start with what the season is, because I think that's the key to understanding why it worked so well. At its core, season 3 of Daryl Dixon is a story about distance. Not just physical distance, not just Daryl's distance from home, but yes, it does take us all across Spain's dusty plains, ruined villages, and sunburnt coastlines. But rather it's about emotional distance, the distance between who we were and who we've become, especially where it comes to Daryl and Carol. If the first season was about Daryl's accidental exile and the second about his reluctant leadership, season 3 is about reckoning. With loss, with guilt, and the seemingly impossible desire to go home when all the odds seem to be stacked against him. The scope of the story is smaller than the original series was, but the emotional scope feels massive. That's why I think this show, and this season in particular, works as a kind of spiritual western. Every frame feels haunted by the ghosts of what used to be. And from the very start, you feel that tone settle in. That Rilke quote that opens the season, I have my dead and I have let them go. It's almost like the show is reminding and warning us. We're not in a story about fighting the dead, we're in a story about learning how to live with the memories of them. And Daryl and Carol are both carrying that weight. Daryl has always been the wanderer, the reluctant savior who's never stayed in one place long enough to call it home. And Carol has always been a survivor who's lost everything and yet somehow still believes in rebuilding. This season, they both find themselves staring into that same emotional mirror. When you've survived everything, when the war's over and you've outlived the people you fought for, what's left? And what this season says beautifully is that what's left is connection, both the connections that remain and the potential to form new ones. But let's talk about the world of Season 3, because this is one of the richest and most atmospheric settings the Walking Dead franchise has ever created. Spain, as depicted here, is both breathtaking and terrifying. The cinematography, those golden sunsets over ruins, the echoing cathedrals, the crumbling towns, gives a sense of a civilization long past saving, but still clinging to ritual. And the show makes Spain feel alive in its decay. You can almost smell the dust and feel the dry wind. But, just like in France, you can also feel the centuries of history pressing down. The weight of old power, old religion, and old sins. And that's where the regime of El Alcazar comes in. This twisted feudal monarchy that's basically turned survival into ritualized cruelty. They hold La Ofrenda, a ceremony where young women are offered to the ruling elite, and in the finale, we see them turning the apocalypse into performance, literally dressing up walkers in costumes for entertainment. It's grotesque, but it's also very pointed. This isn't a story about zombies, it's a story about power. How humanity, no matter how far it falls, always seems to rebuild its hierarchies kings, queens, servants, slaves, rich, poor, even after the end of the world. The Walking Dead franchise has always flirted with political allegory, perhaps most memorably during the Commonwealth arc in season 11 of the original show, but Daryl Dixon season 3 leans into it just as boldly. The El Alcazar elite aren't just villains, they're symbols of every corrupt institution that's ever convinced people to play by the same broken rules. And in that world, Daryl and Carol represent something radical. Not rebellion for its own sake, but empathy as rebellion. Their refusal to bow, their insistence on saving the innocent, on defying systems of control, that's the emotional spine of the entire season. So before we get into Daryl, I do want to spend some time talking about Carol, because she absolutely shines this season. Melissa McBride gives one of her finest performances of her career here. We've watched Carol evolve from a victim of abuse to a hardened warrior to now a woman rediscovering what it means to care again. Not just out of obligation, but out of choice. Her relationship with Antonio, played beautifully by Eduardo Noriega, is the key to that transformation. Their connection feels real, tender, hesitant, and fragile. Antonio is a man still grieving the death of his wife, trapped in a town ruled by his former best friend turned oppressor Fede, and Carol becomes this person who shows him that grief doesn't have to be a prison. There's a wonderful scene where Antonio shows her home movies, His son Roberto is a little boy, and happier times with his late wife. It's not just nostalgia, it's memory as resistance. In a world that's fallen apart, to remember what love looks like is its own form of rebellion. And when Carol risks her life to steal medicine for Roberto, you see just how far she's come. From the pragmatic survivor of the original Walking Dead series to someone who acts on empathy, even when it doesn't make strategic sense. That's something the Walking Dead universe rarely rewards, and yet here it's what keeps hope alive. In many ways, Carol was the moral center of the story this season. She may lie and fight and bleed and kill when she must, but these days she never loses sight of the human beings in front of her. And when she tells Daryl that she wants him to stop running, it's like she's speaking to the audience too. Stop surviving and start living. So now let's turn to Daryl, because this is also one of Norman Reedus' strongest seasons ever. Daryl's journey this year is that of a man rediscovering purpose after loss. When we first met him in season 1 of his series, he was a drifter defined by anger. In season 2, he became a reluctant hero, and now in season 3, he's become something closer to a legend. A figure moving through the wasteland like a wandering samurai or cowboy, haunted but resolute. The key point for him this season is in Limbo, that Western style standalone episode where he helps a group of lepers take back their stolen water from a grotesque despot named Chofo. That episode could have almost felt like filler, but it is so much more. It was about Daryl rediscovering why he fights, not because he has to, but because he wants to help people again. And what's beautiful is how the show strips him down to the essentials. 4 bullets, no backup, and still he charges forward. He's not superhuman, he's not some sort of messianic savior. He's just someone who refuses to give up on decency. And by the finale, and when he tells Justina, the world's messed up, I felt like something got lost, the chance to really have something, it's one of the most honest lines in Walking Dead history lately. Because that's the truth of this world. The apocalypse didn't kill humanity, it revealed what was always broken. And yet here's Daryl, still trying to fix it one act of compassion at a time. He just had to rediscover how. Now let's talk about that finale, Solaz del Mar, because it's as strong of a finale as this spin off series has ever given us. The structure is brilliant. Two simultaneous battles. Daryl's assault on El Alcazar and Carol's desperate rescue mission back at Solaz del Mar. The El Alcazar sequence, with the walkers literally used as marionettes for the entertainment of the ruling elite before shit hits the fan, it's just the latest disturbing image this franchise has given us. It may be absurd and horrifying, but it also encapsulates everything this series wants to say. When humanity stops treating life with dignity, we become worse than the monsters we've created. And that final act of liberation, the chaos, the revolt, the fire, it's The Walking Dead at its best. Horrifying, poetic, and mythic. And what makes the finale unforgettable isn't just the spectacle, it's the intimacy. That final sequence of Daryl and Carol standing in front of their burning boat was pure cinema. Devastating and hopeful all at the same time. They're so close to going home, to America, to closure, but this world won't let them just yet. And in that moment, we know they're not yet defeated. And the fact that Cadron is still out there, watching from distance, hinting at what's next, some sort of convergence, maybe even a lingering continuation of the France storyline for the final season, it's not closure yet, but it's the perfect place to pause. So, what does all of this mean in the broader tapestry of The Walking Dead? This season takes the central question of the franchise, what does it mean to be human after the fall of civilization, and reframes it. In this season, humanity wasn't defined by survival or strength, it was defined by empathy. It's telling that in every conflict this season, whether it was with Fede or Chofo or the Alcazar monarchy, that Daryl and Carol win not just through brute force, but with solidarity, through helping the powerless, through refusing to become what they hate. That's what separates The Walking Dead from other post apocalyptic fiction. It's not just about the monsters we fight, it's about the monsters we refuse to become. The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon season 3 understands that, and that's why it's such a poignant continuation of this entire mythology that started way back in 2010. The Walking Dead has been something almost mythic, and this season in particular was part Western, part war story, and part spiritual parable. A story about finding grace in a graceless world. So that's why I love this season. It wasn't just good television, it was meaningful television. And as the show has always been at its best, it's a reminder that even in a universe that's lost almost everything, humanity can still rebuild itself through compassion and courage. So, where does the show go from here? We know that season 4 is going to be the final season of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. And after this season, the ending feels both inevitable and exciting. We've got Cadron back in the mix, presumably reconnecting with Daryl and Carol. Fede is still alive, possibly a lingering threat in the final season. And across the ocean, we know there's still the dream of home. We know that Rick's still there, we know that Laurence is there, and maybe, finally, the chance to stop running. If this season was about redemption, the final one may just be about reconciliation. Daryl coming to peace with who he is, and Carol finally finding the home she's been denied for so long. Maybe only one of them will end up choosing to return to America by the end. Whatever happens, this season proves something important. The Walking Dead isn't just surviving on nostalgia, it's still evolving, and it's still telling human stories. And for me, that's why season 3 was great, and it continues to show us why The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon is one of the best spin offs this franchise has given us. And all right, that was my deep dive. So let's open it up. I want to hear what you all think. Any favorite episodes, favorite performances? Do you think Daryl and Carol will ever make it home? I'm going to spend the rest of this stream taking questions about the season, so feel free to write into the live chat so we can keep this discussion going. It looks like there's no one in the live chat, but I do have some questions here to answer, so I'll get into those for now. The first question I have here is what was my overall impression of the season? And obviously, as you can probably tell, I enjoyed it. I think The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon is the best Walking Dead spinoff that's still going right now. And this season continued that. How did it compare to previous seasons of the show? I actually think it was a step up from season two. Season two, I felt like had to make a lot of space for Carol to enter the story. And now that she's a main part of it again, it really felt like they were able to hit the ground running and keep things evenly divided between the two main characters. Then I'm asked, what moment or episode defined the season for me? Oh, I think for me this season, that I want to say it was episode 5, Limbo. Oh, that was perfection. Um, how would I rank this season among the other Walking Dead spin-offs? I would roughly, at least with the seasons we've gotten so far, I would generally put The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon probably go would go under the original show and The Ones Who Live, but it would go above Fear the Walking Dead, Dead City, World Beyond, and Tales of the Walking Dead, if you even want to count that one. And then I was asked how I felt about the pacing and narrative structure this season, and the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that there's fewer episodes per season these days, both for Daryl Dixon and Dead City. This season was 7 episodes, and it makes things feel a lot tighter. There's definitely no episode that you could call filler. Even Limbo, which is one of my favorite episodes, even though it felt like it deviated, it was actually a huge turn for Daryl as a character that really takes him into the final episodes of the season. So the pacing was great. Someone else asked, did the season feel cohesive, or were there parts that dragged? And I mean, like I just said, with so few episodes in a season, there's nowhere for it to drag. So absolutely cohesive. Someone asked if the finale was satisfying as a conclusion of this chapter. Oh my gosh, not only was it satisfying, but if not for those final few minutes, you would have thought it was going to be an end of the whole show. I'm genuinely curious what the main story of the final season will even be, because as seasons 1 and 2 definitely felt more like a two-part story. This season 3 felt like a complete story, just with a cliffhanger at the very end. Um, Someone else asked, did the show successfully raise the stakes compared to previous seasons? I wouldn't say it raised the stakes, it almost felt like it reset the stakes. Yeah, it definitely resets the stakes because they're still trying to get home. It was a new conflict they encountered, just as serious as the one in France. And with one season left, I have a feeling that they'll be raised yet again. Someone asked which character had the best development arc this season, and that would have to be Daryl, without a doubt. Like I said, Limbo was this huge turning point for the character, and that was very noticeable. Which performance stood out to me the most? Um, Honestly, if we're gonna obviously Norman Reedus and Melissa McBride are always incredible, but I kind of want to get into one of the new characters, and I will point out I did a poll in my post promoting this live stream, and by far everyone's favorite new character was Antonio. So I really have to point out Eduardo Noriega playing Antonio. His performance as that character was excellent. He did such great work, and I really look forward to seeing what he brings to the final season. Someone asked if I felt emotionally connected to the leads, and after 15 years, I feel like it would be hard not to be emotionally connected to Daryl at this point. I'm 15 years older than I was when the show premiered because I've been watching the entire franchise since the beginning. I've caught every spinoff, and at this point, I have to know what happens to Daryl by the end. There is nothing that would get me to stop watching at this point, even if it would just be terrible. I need to know how it ends. Someone asked if there were any character choices that didn't work for me. And I would say, no, there were no character choices that didn't work for me. But I did hear that some people didn't like that Daryl was about to rob Roberto and Justina when they first laid eyes on them. And actually, I think that especially knowing where he was at that point wasn't that surprising to me. We know that he was not going to just like murder them, but have I ever thought that he's not above robbing strangers? Absolutely not. No, that is absolutely a Daryl thing to do. He's not Rick Grimes. And I think that you could even argue that might have been an intentional parallel with Rick and Michonne in The Walking Dead: The Ones Who Live when they're faced with a similar choice. Then someone asked what themes stood out the most this season. Oh, this season was definitely all about kind of regaining what's been lost and finding what's still left to live for. The distance between where you've been and where you can still go. That was everything this season. That opening line of what was it? I have my dead. That Rilke quote, the poem. It's oh yeah, I have my dead and I have let them go. That's really the theme of the entire season, and I suspect it will carry through to the end of the series. Um, oh, this is an interesting question. Someone asked me if the show maintained the same tone as the past Walking Dead entries, or if it evolved into something new. I would say at the base it's the same tone, but definitely with its own spin on it, especially with a little more of a Western tone this season, in a way that Fear the Walking Dead tried to do in a different way. But here with the visuals of being in Spain, yeah, definitely kind of an evolution of the tone is how I'd put that. Yeah. Someone asked if the balance between horror, action, and drama was effective, and I would say absolutely. Ultimately it's a drama first, and the horror and action are kind of there to support it, and that's what makes it great storytelling. I even remember back when The Walking Dead was a new show and people would kind of fall off because there wasn't enough horror and action for them and there was too much drama. And I think that was the point at which you could kind of tell who understood the point of the show and who didn't. Someone asked how the cinematography and locations enhanced the story, and I would honestly just say the way Spain looked, the color palette, the cinematography, it really lended towards the Western feeling of the show. Uh, Someone asked how well does the show use its European setting to distinguish itself? I mean, the two France seasons, they felt unique from anything The Walking Dead had done before visually, and now that the series is set in Spain, it once again looks entirely different. I mean, the same way that Dead City looks different. I mean, the same way every show is kind of doing its own thing. It's been great. Someone asked if the special effects and Walker designs have been on par with the franchise's best work, and yeah, Greg Nicotero's team has never dropped the ball on how the Walkers look. And what's really impressive to me is how they always keep finding ways to come up with some new set piece, some new zombie visual, finding new ways to make the Walkers look different or have a different kind of Walker running around, or I should say, walking around. I don't know where they keep coming up with these things. It's actually impressive, especially after 15 years and who knows how many episodes at this point. Someone asked if this season added anything new or meaningful to the Walking Dead mythology. I mean, we've seen what one more country looks like, what one more sort of society that people could create. There's also, interestingly enough, if you want to catch a little Easter egg, there was another PPP card that was laying around. We assumed that was something connected to the CRM when there was one left behind when we lost Heath way back in season 6, I want to say it was. As for what that means for the future of this franchise, who knows? I almost get the impression they've kind of left behind kind of a shared storyline or like shared story arc between the shows now that the CRM is seemingly done with. But there's always new things, and I almost get the impression that the overall story is almost kind of winding down. But that doesn't mean there can't be new and meaningful things as this franchise continues. Someone asked what I hope to see in the final season of The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon. I just really want to see these character arcs get resolved in a way that really brings things full circle in the best way to where they were when we first met them 15 years ago. I mean, Daryl and Carol are probably the two most iconic characters who are still with the franchise. And how their stories end are a huge part of why I'm even still watching. Um, Someone asked if the political backdrop of Alcazar added something fresh to the Walking Dead formula, and I mean, yeah, I mean, it essentially created this whole subtext about patriarchy, about oppression, about political structures. And the Commonwealth story back in The Walking Dead season 11 very much did that in its own way. And this is another great way to look at it. It's depressing how likely it is that humanity would keep turning to these same sorts of structures. And seeing the treatment of women, especially, was heartbreaking, but made for great storytelling all the same. And based on that, and going off of that, someone asked if the depiction of Alcazar's feudal hierarchy was effective as a critique of power and corruption, and it really was. There's always going to be those people who try to control, who try to create these political power structures, and people are so easily suckered into falling into this idea of needing leaders, of needing these controlling power structures that ultimately just oppress. And you know, you always have to hold. There will be people like Daryl and Carol that will remind them, like, you don't need these things to be happy and to have a life worth living. Someone else asked what I thought of Daryl's arc this season, from loner back to being reluctant hero yet again, and it was great. I mean, especially knowing that he only has one season left, you really want to see Daryl like definitively decide that he is going to be a hero. He is going to be a good person. He is going to be another Rick Grimes figure. And speaking of that, I really hope they reunite and so they can just see like what they've become because they haven't seen each other in several years at this point. Someone asked how Carol's relationship with Antonio changed the dynamic of the show. I mean, it's so great to see her find love again, especially because it's been so long since her thing with Ezekiel. At this point, I know I alluded to it earlier. I wouldn't be surprised if she decides to stay in Spain. I think that she and Daryl could have a tearful goodbye at the end of the series as she decides to stay, but encourages him to go back home. He was always the one that, was very much happy to have that family, and while she was too, she doesn't need them. Daryl needs to make sure that Rick is okay and to see him. Carol already knows that he made it back home. I'm assuming. That's what the timeline would suggest. So yeah, I think Carol finding love with Antonio could be the reason why she stays. So that's definitely a huge change to the dynamic, if I'm right. Oh, here's a good question. Was Roberto and Justina's subplot compelling as a parallel to Daryl and Carol's own struggle to get home? And that's exactly what it was. It was a kind of a parallel. They had something they wanted to live for. They had they had their own hopes, and Daryl and could not turn a blind eye. Carol definitely couldn't from the beginning, and that's why she had to kind of cajole and convince him a little. But eventually he remembered why he does what he does. Oh, here's a good one. Someone asked me how I felt about Fede as a villain, sympathetic or irredeemable. I don't believe anyone's irredeemable. I mean, Negan showed us that. I I always want to approach any character with some degree of empathy. I think Fede is ultimately the result of, someone who thinks that someone has to be the leader, that someone has to hold things together. And I mean, we even saw Rick Grimes struggle with that in certain ways. I've heard people say that Rick Grimes could easily, had the circumstances been right, have become a Negan. And that's essentially what Fede did. So, while I don't necessarily feel a deep, heartfelt sympathy for Fede, and I can't say I care too much what becomes of him, I also think the show did a good job of demonstrating his depth as a character and why he was doing what he was doing. And that's what makes the villain more interesting. Oh, someone asked what I made of Paz and Elena's story and if it added depth to the world. And I actually thought their story was very sweet. I definitely think they'll be a part of the final season. Well, without a doubt. If I'm wrong, then, so be it, but I think they'd be foolish to just disregard those two characters after they've been reunited. Oh, here's a good question. Someone asked how the season explored the idea of home. The idea of home, whether it's a place or just the people you love, and like I said, Carol may have found a new home. Daryl's got to get back home to Rick and to Laurent, but I think Carol may have found hers with Antonio. Oh yeah, here's a good question someone asked me. Someone asked, "What does Daryl's line to Justina about the world being messed up, like something got lost, mean in the context of the series?" And that really stuck out to me because that's something that this show's been dealing with ever since the original show, since it first began. Like, we've seen all these different societies form, and they all make some of the same mistakes over and over. People making the wrong decisions in the name of survival and sacrificing compassion, or vice versa, being afraid that other people will do the same thing and they preemptively kind of close themselves off and they do harm, and it's this vicious cycle. Like, people see it as a dog eat dog world, and that's what it becomes. Oh, here's a question someone asked. Does season 3 suggest that humanity can still build something good, or is it too late? Just as much as we saw the oppression of Alcazar, we also saw people willing to do good. I mean, take Valentina. It was small, but she essentially had a small society going, just a small group of people being decent. I mean, we saw it back in Alexandria that people were keeping things together in a way that was not oppressive. Like, the leadership that Daryl and Michonne and everyone was originally forming in Alexandria before the Commonwealth story, like, it wasn't about strict rules or about enforcing things or about cruelty. It was just about people working together, not through bureaucracy, not through having leaders and everyone else doing what they say, but just through communication. Oh, here's a good question. Someone asked me how this show's moral themes compare to earlier Walking Dead arcs such as Rick's journey. And it's funny how much Daryl's journey since Rick left the original show has paralleled Rick's journey. It really does feel like he's kind of becoming a leader in his own way, just like Rick did. And I'd say he's gone through just as much growth as Rick did. Oh, someone asked, in what ways did the season feel more like a Western than a traditional zombie series? I mean, all you have to do, once again, is watch the episode Limbo. I know I keep mentioning it, but like, you're basically watching a Pale Rider or the Magnificent Seven in that episode. It's pure Western. And the entire season was, but that episode in particular is the best example of it. Someone mentioning how the series uses color, light, and texture to create mood. Yeah, that was beautiful. Those golden colors of Spain were just phenomenal. Someone asked if I found the tone of the show more hopeful or bleak, and for me, The Walking Dead has ultimately always been hopeful. Even, in the season 7 premiere, everyone being all sad about Glenn and Abraham dying. Uh, it that episode may have been heartbreaking, but by the end of the season, the story was ultimately a hopeful one. I feel like no matter how many characters die, no matter how many horrible things happen, the thesis of the show is ultimately a hopeful one. And I think if you ever think that it's not, you're getting too lost in individual characters and you're not looking at the big picture of the story that's being told. Oh, here's a good question. Someone asked if I noticed any callbacks to earlier Walking Dead seasons and character moments. I absolutely loved when Carol brought up Jerry when she was watching home movies with Antonio. That was beautiful because he was always a favorite, like, minor character in The Walking Dead. So just to hear her bring him up made me really happy because it was true. I thought of him too. Oh, someone asked what I think the reappearance of Cadron at the end of the season means, and I suspect that he's ultimately going to end up being probably the most developed character of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon outside of Daryl and Carol. Padrone is a really fascinating character, and I was really glad to see him return. It was one of those rare instances of a character appearance that actually surprised me. And I think his reappearance will ultimately lead into how this series ends. Someone asked if I think Fede will return as a main antagonist next season, and I think that's actually extremely likely. Yeah, maybe or maybe not the main antagonist, but definitely a major antagonistic force. Whether he redeems himself or not, he's going to cause problems first. Or maybe he'll get a bullet in the head right when season 4 starts. Who knows? Oh, here's a good question. How do I think season? What do I think season 4, the final season, will focus on thematically? How do I want Daryl and Carol's stories to end? Should they find peace or continue wandering? I think season 4, the final season of The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, will ultimately be about letting go. I have my dead and I have let them go. I think Daryl will ultimately make peace with his past about the idea that people come and go in life. Sometimes people die. Sometimes your past is painful, but you have to move on. You have to embrace change and welcome new things and new connections. And sometimes that means saying goodbye, and that might mean saying goodbye to Carol if she decides to stay. And as much as she is his family in so many ways, he might have to let her go and embrace the fact that she's happy and know that he can be happy too, regardless of whether he's with her. You know, he went looking for Rick because he couldn't just stay in one place and stay still. And, I really hope that we see him make it back and we see him reunite with Rick and Laurent and just everyone. I think they will both find peace. Both Daryl and Carol will find peace. And with that, that's it for questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into my review of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 3. I look forward to talking with all of you again for Daryl Dixon's final season next year and the return of The Walking Dead Dead City as well. You can also catch me later this week discussing AMC's other major horror franchise, Anne Rice's Immortal Universe. I'm going to be reviewing the series premiere of Talamasca, The Secret Order in that universe that just dropped. In the meantime, that is it for me tonight. So thank you guys so much for tuning in to Fandom from